Greetings, everyone. My name is Peter Young. I'm a member of the Committee 100, and I happen to be chair of this wonderful series, Committee 100 Conversations, Recollection, Pioneers, and Heroes. And before we start this interview with Professor Stephen Chen, uh, it's our guest this afternoon, evening, depending upon what time zone you're in. I'd like to just briefly talk about why this program started and then upcoming ones. Uh, this series really features interviews of Chinese Americans who've contributed to the success of America through their pioneering efforts, their heroic achievements, or their recollections of important events. This is started about a year and a half ago, and this is the 13th interview. And we've been very pleased to have a diverse set of interviewees, whether it's Elaine Chao or David Henry Wang or B.D. Wang or David Ho, very prominent people in each of their fields. And the whole purpose is really two things. One is to make sure that there's a record and a history of the contributions that Chinese Americans have made to this country, but also if in a small way we can contribute towards appreciation and some reduction of Asia hate, we hope that we'll be able to accomplish. I'm very, very pleased to have Professor Chu as our interviewee. Usually Professor Chu, people have only accomplished something in one field, and you've managed to accomplish excellence in two fields. So that's unique all by itself. I won't read aloud his bio, which is on the invitation, and those of you in the audience obviously read it. But I think the two things to note: he is the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor of Physics of Molecular and Cellular Physiology and of Energy Science and Engineering at Stanford University, that well-known sunny West Coast school. But he also during his career, he has accomplished an enormous amount in science and was a Nobel laureate in physics, and then went on to be Secretary of Energy under President Barack Obama. I just am very, very pleased to be interviewing him today. This is a whole series, so you can expect there'll be future ones from time to time, and you'll get invitations. So what I'd like to do is just start out and really ask you, Professor Chu, tell me a little bit about when you were growing up and maybe some of the early phases of your career history before you went into academia.
Okay, my parents were Chinese. They were father born in Taichung, which is just west of Shanghai. My mother in Beijing. They met in Tsinghua during World War II. When there was a group of universities that went to southwestern China. And then my father went to MIT for graduate school. My mother joined several years later. Also at MIT, he in chemical engineering, my mother in economics. But then they started to raise a family. So I have three brothers, one older by 2 years and one younger by 3 years. The extended family during a time of the Communist Revolution and before. I think both sides of the family were educated in Europe or the United States, and they went back to China to become professors. But after the Communist Revolution, that was not a healthy thing to do, and so everybody had to leave. And they came to the United States. So there's an extended family on my father's side of two older sisters. What else can I say about it? We were raised I was born in St. Louis when my father was a professor at Washington University, St. Louis. But he was lured to Brooklyn Polytech, which at the time had a fantastic legendary chemical engineer, Professor Don Othmer, who made his legendary department. And so we actually grew up on Long Island in the middle of Nassau County in a suburb, a bedroom community. Um, my parents, as immigrants, they weren't, and Brooklyn probably doesn't pay a lot of money. So we were in the poor section of a pretty rich town. But that meant that we could go to a very, very good public school. And so all of us went to Garden City High School and junior high school and kindergarten all through. Um, and then after that, my older brother went to Princeton. I was not a serious student till my senior year. And so I applied to Princeton, Yale, got rejected, and went to the University of Rochester, which at the time was a very good school. It's still a good school. It had the sixth largest endowment in the country. And so I was the first person in the extended family not to go to Harvard or Princeton as a male. So I was a family failure. But
Have
luckily,
they forgiven you for it at this
yeah, they may have, I don't know.
point?
But in any case, at Rochester, I really blossomed. I I was a math major and physics major, and I think it was better that I went to a place like Rochester. It was, but some of the professors in the math and physics department took me under their wing and paid me maybe more attention than I would have gotten at Yale or Princeton. So that was nice. It was good to boost my ego. Now I should say my younger brother, he was even more rebellious than me. I dropped out of school for 3 months, but went back. He didn't graduate from high school. He didn't want to compete with. By this time, I was doing well in college. My brother graduated from Princeton, went to get a PhD in physics at MIT, and I was doing well. My younger brother dropped out of high school, bummed around with his high school pals, but then decided he needed to make something of himself. He had a falling out with parents, so he talked his way into UCLA.
Wow,
And
that's hard to do.
it's well, there's a few. He's a very bright person, and I think he impressed a few professors that would vouch for him. And his claim to fame was that he made the big poker game. This is the poker game where the president of the university, the chancellor of UCLA, were playing, and then there was my younger brother who was an undergraduate.
Yeah.
He eventually got a PhD to stay out of the draft at the age of 22, and went to and got a few degrees from Yale and Harvard in law. So he's a very
Wow.
famous.
So
Um,
he made up for his slow
yes,
beginning, right?
yeah. So we joked, my younger brother and I, who was the real black sheep of the family, whether it's him or me. But but in any case, he has become one of the most famous patent litigators in the United States.
Yeah,
And even though he's in his middle 70s, 75, he's still an active litigator.
yeah, yeah.
And so, he turned out to be very successful.
Well, your parents, were they typical Chinese parents of that era? Did you feel
Yes.
like they directed you to where you were, where you ended up and what you were going to study?
Well, they all expected us to do well, to get PhDs. That was part of the family tradition, my mother and father's side. And it was not up for debate. Uh,
It was a fact, right? It
it
was,
was going to be a fact that we're
yeah.
all going to be scholars. We're all going to, and we're all going to go to graduate school and get PhDs or something like that. Anyway, and so of this extended family, everybody of the seven, uh, two brothers and four cousins, everyone either has PhD and MD or both.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So it's weird.
yeah. Well, I guess that's a testament to two things: the power of Chinese parents but the power of genetics as well, because I don't think any of you turned out to be poets, right?
No, although I did one cousin who was a physics major as undergraduate. Then he got I forget what it was. It was a very prestigious uh, fellowship, and he went to Oxford, but he got a degree in English theater, and then went back and got an MD and a PhD in philosophy of science. So he's the closest thing to a quote poet.
By the way, a small note, you mentioned Don Othmer.
Yeah.
I knew Don Othmer, and in fact, he endowed what is now the Science History Institute, and I was on the board for many years. And he did quite well, as you know, in an investment he made, but he gave almost all his money to that institute that has a museum that's dedicated to, uh, documenting the history of science innovation. So he's a legend, though, without question.
Well, he's a legend in chemical engineering, and he had a boyhood friend who founded Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah, yeah,
And and he never took any money out of this, so he just let it ride. And so when he died, he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
yeah, yeah,
Nobody knew he was rich.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
he
yeah,
lived very modestly.
yeah. No, absolutely. Well, it's very interesting because, but what, other than your parents and so forth, uh, what caused you to be so focused on sciences originally? You know, uh, I can relate to what you said. I started out undergraduate in physics and math, switched to economics, went to the dark side, right? But
Uh,
you stayed in science. What was it that motivated you? What attracted you to be science, and which obviously became a passion for you?
well, I had in my junior and senior year extraordinary physics teacher.
Hmm.
And in my Nobel bio, I really paid him homage. He really inspired me. I had a great calculus teacher, great geometry teacher. And so it was in those early years that I really began to get excited about science. So even though my parents wanted me to go into science, it has to come from within, and it
Yeah,
certainly
yeah.
started to come from within with me. And so I fell in love with physics and math, but I wanted to do something. I was a little afraid if I was going to be a mathematician, math major, and get a PhD in mathematics. I was afraid that maybe a couple dozen people in the whole world would care of what I did.
Or could understand what you were doing, right? Much less care, right?
Whereas physics touches the real world, and so I went into physics to graduate school.
Yeah, that's right. Well, maybe trace through your career in science, your career in science before you won the Nobel Prize. What everyone goes through transitions, things that they get interested in, zigs and zags, so forth. Was it a straight line, or did you find yourself, shifting in your career in science?
By the time I was an undergraduate, it was beginning to be an increasingly straight line. I decided by my junior year that I would be in physics. I went to graduate school at University of California, Berkeley. I had a couple of classmates at Rochester also went with me uh, to Berkeley.
Uh,
At that time, the physics department was considered the best in the world.
mhm.
It had many no active Nobel laureates at the time, and it it continued. I was a little afraid when I was in Rochester. Okay, here's the best physics department in the world. There are all these smart people from Caltech and Harvard and everywhere else. How would I stack up from the University of Rochester? But after, a half a semester, I said, oh, it's okay, because as I started to learn about my classmates, they were asking me for help on homework. So I said, okay, I got a good education.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a strong believer that it's not your pedigree that matters, it's what you accomplish. And it's amazing how many, if you look at famous people who've accomplished something, you'd be amazed at how many people didn't go to some famous name school
As an undergraduate, that's absolutely true.
Yeah,
Graduate school is very different.
different. Yeah, yeah, that's right. But as an undergraduate, if you
Yeah.
look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, you'll see as many people who went to Iowa State as went to
Yeah.
Harvard, you know. Uh, Now, it's a real secret that you went from the University of Rochester to Berkeley for the weather. Is that the reason?
Well, Rochester's weather is not so good. It's cold. It's hot and sweaty in the summer, but I wasn't there most of the summers. I was working
Yeah.
with summer jobs, but in the winter it's pretty cold and miserable. They have steam tunnels, but I grew quite fond of the place. And as I said, um, I was uh, the math department faculty started inviting me to their faculty parties when I
Yeah.
was a junior in college. It was a little unusual because they didn't invite the graduate students.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's right.
But they thought, but and they I was there at those in those days you could legally drink at the age of 18, and so I actually learned from my math professors how to savor single malt scotch.
Oh, well, see, and that was the key to your career, right?
It must be.
You talked about this professor that you really, got inspired by. So,
Right.
and I firmly believe, and the data shows a lot, that a lot of successful people, one way or the other, had someone who really inspired them, who acted as a mentor and so forth. And I guess that's the case, right? For you, right?
Well, I had a couple of great professors at Rochester, but the best professor was my thesis advisor when I got to Berkeley.
Hmm.
Uh, he, he was an extraordinarily gifted lecturer. I was so impressed. I took a course my first quarter with him, and I said, I'm so impressed with him. And so after I passed my qualifying exams, fall of the next year, I went up to him and asked, I'm interested in perhaps working with you. At the time, I had what's called an NSF fellowship, so I could have independent money.
Hmm.
He said, "Oh, I was about to ask you that." He had some brilliant graduates, a very, very small group. They had left, graduated, and there was a hiatus, and so I would be his first graduate student of a next generation. And and what I found was, number one, besides being a gifted teacher, he actually loved doing experiments with his own hands. I really mean his own hands. We
Hmm.
would be in the machine shop and machining together. His wife used to complain that he spent far more time with me than with her.
Hmm. Hmm.
We worked 6 days a week, maybe Saturday afternoon, a little bit shorter, um, side by side, and it was not only he wouldn't assign me all the grunt work and he would do something. No, I mean we said, okay, we do this, we do that, and when it came to clean up the lab, we swept the floor, and sort out the screws that lay on the floor together. And so it was an amazing experience. Um, and it turned out that his students, uh, even though he has a very, very small number of students, there are a very high fraction of people who went on to get in the National Academy of Sciences and things like that. So he was a truly inspiring person, professor, but also a model. We all admired him greatly when we were both his students and former students.
Yeah. Now tell me about the path that led you to work on the discoveries that ultimately ended up getting you the Nobel Prize, right? Because that's always interesting, which is how people decide to focus on a particular problem and so forth. And was it a bumpy road or was it a smooth road or was it
Well, it was
zigzag?
unusual. So when I was a graduate student, and then I stayed as a postdoc
Yeah.
for 2 years, and and then the physics department did something very unusual. They asked me to apply and gave me an assistant professor appointment.
Yeah.
Even though I was worked for the same thesis advisor and as a postdoctoral fellow, I don't know what they saw in me, but they broke tradition of 25 years. usually they want to send you away and you go away for a couple of yeyears and see if
Right.
you do well.
Right.
Uh, but for whatever reason, they did that. And they said, this is very funny. They said, since you spent all your time with, Gene Cummins, there's a lot of debate, and have had a pretty narrow view, and so we want you. The job is yours. Here's a set of money. You can start your group, or we can give you the option. You can go away for a year or two if someone else will pay your way, but the job is yours.
Yeah.
So I took the money. Bought some apparatus and started training my first graduate student. But I went to Bell Labs, thinking,
Oh,
okay,
oh, wow. Bell Labs was like the cathedral of innovation for a
yeah.
while, right?
So I applied to Bell Labs, and it was the cathedral, and it was an eye-opening experience. I got there, and it just like blinders came off, and there's all sorts of new science, new things, tremendously brilliant people up and down the hallways. No one had a big group. If you were very good, you could have a technician and a postdoc. If you're not so good, you can have one or the other, and if you're less good, you have neither. But because there's no group, it was steeped in getting their scientists to work with each other,
Yeah, yeah,
which was part of the magic sauce.
yeah,
The
yeah.
other part of the magic sauce is they were incredibly brilliant people, and it was a great experience. I was going to go back. I said to the Bell Labs people, I promised them I was
Go
part of.
back, right?
They knew about that, and so I told them after a year and a half I'm going back. I have an obligation, and then I couldn't sleep for 3 days. So so I said, maybe this is not a good thing. All the people Bell says you're doing so well here. Why do you want to go back? Funding's rough. And some of the professors at Berkeley, colleagues said, you're doing so well there. Why do you want to come back here when funding's rough? So in the end, I stayed for 9 years.
Oh, wow. Talk about taking a time off.
Yes. And I had discussions with my faculty friends at Berkeley and said, well, if your end point is to be, a professor at Berkeley, it's much better to enter as a junior professor because your chance of tenure is good. But
Mhm.
if you enter as a full professor, you have to be one of the world's best.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I don't know, but I'll, I guess, take my chances and say, but I felt really bad about not returning. Now, in answer to your question, so I spent 5 years in Murray Hill. I was doing condensed matter physics, some work on exotic atoms, an electron and its antiparticle makes an atom. I did a number of things. I looked at condensed matter, but then I went to Homedale, which is the other major branch of the labs. The director at Homedale said, well, I want to hire you. I'm going to bring boost really fundamental science at Homedale, and I think you're the perfect person to lead a department in that. So I became head of the quantum electronics research department in Homedale.
Wow.
When I got there, I was in my 33 or 34, and I met socially a fellow by the name of Arthur Ashkin. He was another department head in this branch at Homedale. He had dreamed of trapping atoms for since the middle 1970s. He had trapped particles, little levitated particles, polystyrene glass, and in water, and then he dreamed that maybe you can do this with atoms. But the work had shut down by 1978, 1980, because they weren't making much progress. Art gave me all his reprints and said, I wanted to keep me interested in this because I, by then, had a reputation of being able to do very hard experiments and get them to work. So I looked at it and scratched this, followed what he wrote and said, management was right to shut it down. It didn't look like it was
Yeah.
gonna really happen. And And then it turned out, and so the idea then, following the ion trap people, where an ion trap, because it's charged, with electric and magnetic fields, you have a very, very deep trap. Atoms are neutral, very shallow traps. And the idea in an ion trap is you trap it and then you can laser cool it. The idea of laser cooling was in the air by then. And so the idea was, Ashton's idea was first trap and then cool it. But then began to realize it wasn't going to work. The management was right to shut it down. And I kind of reinvented a way of laser cooling using Doppler shifts. I didn't really know about the Hans Shallow paper, which was written in 1975. But I said, wow, this is really simple. You have beams coming this way, that way, and this way, big beams. And I did a baby calculation, said these atoms will get to very, very cold temperatures, and they'll be so cold that even a shallow trap can hold on to them. So I went to my boss and said, hey, this is really going to work because first you cool them, then you trap them. And he said, it's really going to work. And within 1 year from the time I told my boss, Chuck Shank, this is, you do an end run, you reverse the thing and you use this cooling technique. I got it to work.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
only took 1 year. I
yeah.
was really good at doing experiments by then, me, a postdoc, and a technician. And the postdoc is now a professor at Stanford. The technician was a brilliant technician that I recruited. I didn't go through the HR in Bell Labs because I found it disappointing. So I would just get people to put up signs at Princeton and Rutgers, places in the local area to see if I can get a technician. I stumbled on this guy who is absolutely fantastic. He later went out to found this laser component company called Thor Labs, which is a big laser supply mounts started, but it's a huge empire. The guy
Yeah.
was brilliant. And so within a month I said, hey, he's like a graduate student or postdoc. So I just treat him like a graduate student postdoc with my postdoc
Yeah.
and we just mushed along. Um, and so, and then after the laser cooling happened, then we got the optical trap to work. And the fascinating thing about this was Ashkin had proposed in 1978, if you take a single focus laser beam, perhaps you can hold on to a trap. It was a little sidebar paragraph at the end of a 2.5-page paper.
Yeah.
And he didn't really take it seriously because you had to focus very hard and it's a teeny tiny volume. It wasn't a big volume. And for trapping atoms, you couldn't hold on to anything. And so, but then after we got this optical molasses, got these atoms cooled to hundreds of microkelvin above absolute zero.
Well,
And
so we're at absolute zero or
no, we were maybe at 100 microkelvin, 100 millionths of a degree above absolute, very, very cold.
very close.
But even that, so I was worried. So you have a single focus laser beam, or get a deep enough trap, you can maybe only trap one atom. Well,
Yeah.
you're not going to see one atom
Yeah.
out of this cloud of a million atoms, and it looked hopeless. And then I realized, imagine these atoms going around in this optical goo Brownian motion, and so you had cooling and trapping, so alternate between cooling and trapping. And so if an atom would fall into the trap, it would be
Yeah.
trapped there. And he said, but because they're diffusing around very rapidly, another atom would fall and another. And then I said, oh, this is amazing because they just kind of keep on falling in trap. And after a fraction of a second, you're going to get thousands of atoms in this trap. So I said, this is going to work. I realized that you didn't have to turn it on because you let the active cooling let them fall. Anyway, but a single focus beam, tiny volume. And then we looked, and then you said, the same thing could happen with little polystyrene spheres in water. The water is like optical molasses on a larger micron scale. It keeps the particle cold. And the single focus laser beam should hold on to a particle. And so Ashkin says, okay, let's try it. He goes to his lab, gets it to work. And I look back in history and said he could have done that in 1971,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he just
Didn't
didn't
get
put the
around to it.
pieces
Yeah.
together. It took optical molasses and the single focus laser beam and said, hey, this is going to work with polystyrene spheres. It worked. And then by this time, I was leaving to go to Stanford, and I told Art, hey, this is fantastic. You can trap these particles. You can hold on to bacteria and things, and stuff like that. We can hold on to atoms. So I'm going to tie a little polystyrene sphere to a biomolecule and hold on to it.
Hmm.
Maybe with that, I can, see what it's doing, measure forces, things like that. And then a year and a half later, 2 years later, I was at a meeting in a Volvo place, Sweden, and Ashkin said, wow, you told me you're going to use it. I didn't believe you, but you got it to work. Anyway, Ashkin gets the Nobel Prize many, many years later. I got mine in 97. He gets his. I'm happy for optical tweezers.
Yeah.
But the optical tweezers, the citation was for the fact that this new technique, optical tweezers in biology, allowed you to measure biomolecules and forces they generate and displacements. But I was the first actually person to do it with a biomolecule. But
Yeah.
Ashkin very quickly, made that. So he's a great scientist. And someone in the Nobel Committee said, yeah, I said, it's okay. I have one already. I don't need another one.
But it's an interesting story because you string together, it's like a series of curiosity. You said, I'm curious
Yeah.
about this. And then you went on to that. But it's not a situation where you start out with the concept and said, I know how to get from A to B. It's just each time you from one
Yeah,
stage to another, and then you thought about that. Also, and this is why AI will never necessarily solve all problems, is think about it. You're connecting his method to what you were doing. It's seeing some connection between things that are not obvious immediately, right? And that's where discovery happens, right?
absolutely. I think a lot of discovery happens when you can take something one field and apply it to something else.
Right.
And until there's enough examples of that so that the machines can learn, the human brain is able to do this. But
Totally different way.
yeah.
Now, when you learned that you were getting a Nobel Prize, was it a surprise or, what was your reaction?
Well, it wasn't. I mean, by then, okay, so I did the laser cooling in 1985, 86 with trapped atoms. 87 demonstrated a really good trap that anybody could use. And it just went crazy. And and then I started applying this, laser cooling trapping of atoms it's a method.
Hmm.
And so I said, well, the only thing I knew about it is I could make a better atomic clock. And
Hmm.
so when I was at Stanford, I started making these so-called atomic fountains and showed that you can make better atomic clocks. And within 7 years of our first atomic fountain, it became the time standard of the world. That was the fastest adoption one has ever seen of a technology from discovery to, hey, this really works.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also was able to figure out how to take light and put atoms into a superposition so that part of the atom was here, part of the atom was here, and bring them
Mhm.
back together and combine their atomic wavelengths
Yeah.
in a thing called atom interferometry, which became the first time we did this, we measured the acceleration of gravity on an atom in part in a million, then became 100 parts in a billion. Since that time, me and my graduate students and their students have pushed this. So it is one of the most precise measurement tools we have in physics. Um, and it looks like it could fill a real need in gravity wave detection, among other things, and tests the fundamental physics.
Yeah.
So there was these huge number of applications that started to roll out after you realize that this was a technology that was could be implemented. It didn't take heroic efforts, and so it was. And so I was watching this explode. It's now, for example, the ability to trap atoms, to hold them and cool them down to lowest quantum states. It's now the basis. There are at least 3 or 4 companies that are thinking of using laser cooled atoms and lattices for quantum computing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's continuing the applications, and none of this was imagined when I was doing this in 1985, 86, 87.
Well, it's very interesting because, a lot of science inventions, they don't necessarily have wide application, right? There's some that are fantastic, but the actual application to real world problems may be very limited. It may be a wonderful, discovery. So yours, I mean, did you ever imagine? Because it sounds like the number of things that you have invented or led teams that invented have had very broad applications. Did you ever have any idea that that would be the case, or it was just you said, I want to solve a problem, and let's go for it.
Well, it started out with people were trying to do this for a decade and they couldn't. So I came along and said, hey, I know how to do this. And then after it worked, then I said, oh, you can do this. And then after oh, you can do this and this. And so the applications, when I was first beginning, I wasn't thinking of all these applications. But once you have it in your grasp and
Yeah.
you know it can be done and done pretty easily, then all of a sudden the ideas come. And that happened not just to me, but the wider community. And so it really did take off. It's fabulous to see all these applications. Um, Scientists, what we do is we try to understand nature. We try to figure out what's going on. But it's a real tickle to see something in basic science be used widely and have now industrial applications. So it was it was thrilling actually to watch that.
But, you mentioned Bell Labs. I know a couple people there. One you may know from your time, Warren Danielson. Did you know Warren Danielson at all? But
Warren, no, no. It
no, no.
was what area was he? He was
Oh, he
in.
was in all the telephone
Oh,
technology and so forth.
yeah. The researchy guys were.
Yeah, no, but he did say something which it really relates to you, which is what was really unusual about Labs, which was funded by, a Bell telephone,
Right.
is that it was one of the few places that funded fundamental research, even if they couldn't exactly say what benefit it would have to the shareholders. And that was unusual. On the other hand, there was always some flavor for, uh, practicality. Do you think some of that came from Bell Labs or really just came from somewhere else in terms of your figuring out how things
Look,
be?
it's hard to say. If I look back at the history of Bell Labs, even in the 20s and during World War One, the first great scientist who worked at Bell Labs was a guy named Clint Davison. He started working at Bell during World War One. He's a theoretical physicist, but he liked the ambiance. Anything, the engineers would come to us and ask him for, his thinking about how to solve problems, and he actually liked the idea. And so he got his Nobel Prize for using vacuum tubes
Hmm.
and electrons. And he showed in quantum mechanics, there's a particle wave duality. Light has wavelengths, but it also is a particle photon. Similarly, atoms are particles, but they also are atomic waves. And he showed that atom waves can diffract off a grating and got a Nobel Prize for that using a vacuum tube,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
custom designed vacuum tube.
Still a vacuum tube, right?
and and so if you look at the history, it's amazing. Nyquist was working at Bell Labs, the Nyquist limit, uh, the idea of fluctuation dissipation theorem was coming from all of information theory, Shannon, in the 40s before he left Bell Labs and went to, I think, MIT. He invented information theory. The transistor was invented at Bell Labs. The laser was invented
Yeah,
at Bell
oh,
Labs.
absolutely.
And
So,
it was just all this remarkable things. Because it was a sanctioned monopoly, they would have to license their stuff with very low fees
Yeah.
because it was part of the deal. So it really was a lot of the base, most of semiconductor physics was, from the transistor, Bardeen, Shockley, Bertan, uh, and all the quantum mechanics applications in semiconductors. That was also done at Bell Labs.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And
amazing, amazing place.
switching then. So first of all, so you got the Nobel Prize. You were surprised, but not surprised. You were happy, I'm sure. Uh, Tell me, how did it affect your life after you got it? Did it
Yeah.
change your life? But the other is, to what extent during your career through there and so forth, what was there any sense that being Chinese American had any impact on your life, negatively or positively, through that whole process?
Well, first, let me say that in terms of your question of whether it was expected or not. So the day before, Stanford press guys called me up and said, "Where are you going to be tomorrow morning?" I said, "Oh, I'll be here." I was going to go to Caltech, but I'm too busy, so I canceled out months ago. But I said, "Okay, just in case you get a phone call from Stockholm and get a Nobel Prize, call us up and we'll do this. Do you know something I don't know?" And he said, "No, it's just that the rumors have been mounting over the last couple of
Yeah,
years."
yeah, 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 yeah,
And so there are a lot of rumors.
yeah.
And so in the middle of the night, the Stockholm folks couldn't get hold of me because they changed the area code. And so I never got an official phone call until later that day. But so but I did find out, uh, and it was not fully unexpected. In fact, my graduate students were thinking of playing a joke on me and waking me up in the middle of the night to pretend that I got the Nobel Prize. Then he said, "No, no, he'll get really mad at us." So,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so there were rumors for sure. And I thought, okay, there were rumors, but I knew scientists before they got a Nobel Prize to get it. They didn't all of a sudden become super smart. They were the same. They were smart before,
Yeah.
they were smart. Okay. And so I said, okay, that's fine. And so then I can get on with the rest of my business. I wasn't doing this work to get a prize. I was doing it
Yeah.
because I love science. And then I didn't realize the general public takes this very seriously because
Oh, absolutely.
um, whereas if you're a specialist in that area, you know about each other's work. But so it did begin to change my life in a way that I wasn't really, I was thinking, I'll just stick to my knitting. I'm going to go back and do science. I was going into different fields in science and biology and all these other things as well. Um, but so the good news is I still, for instance, 1997, it's been a while, it's been
Yeah.
nearly 30 years. I have stayed active and I didn't just rest on my laurels because I was excited about
Well,
new things.
goal wasn't your reason for studying science, right?
Right. And I think that fire is in the belly of a lot of scientists. They love what they're doing
Yeah,
and they're excited about.
yeah. And being Chinese American, was it even an issue or positive or negative?
Well, I mean, it's a positive issue in the sense that, in a Chinese American family, they put a premium on education.
Right.
And my parents really inculcated us with the idea that the highest level you can ever achieve is to be a scholar,
Yeah, yeah.
not to be rich, to be a scholar.
Which is the
Um,
Chinese tradition, right?
yeah. And my mother's father was a scholar. He went to Cornell for civil engineering. He goes back and becomes professor in Nanjing, then becomes a dean, and at the age of 30, he became the president of his university.
Yeah.
And so he was brilliant, but when in the Communist Revolution in 49, he had to leave.
Yeah.
She killed. Similar with my father's older sister, who was by then a full professor in organic chemistry at Tsinghua.
Hmm.
Um, so they all had to leave and they went to the United States. And it was rough during those times. If you're a woman, Chinese, I mean, except, there was prejudice against Chinese in the 50s, so let me be candid.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh, and
Uh,
and if you're
your-
a woman,
yeah.
doubly prejudiced. And
Yeah.
so here's this brilliant organic chemist who history says is the most influential organic chemist of her day.
Hmm.
Couldn't get a job as a professor. She ended up teaching in a small school that taught young ladies how to become grade school and high school teachers.
Wow.
Uh, but she was so good that she said, "Well, I'll see what happens." And she applied for an NIH grant, National Institutes of Health grant,
Okay.
got it, and for the rest of her career, they funded her, built a laboratory in this small school that had no research.
Yeah.
It was because she was really brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
My grandfather, now he's 50, imagine he has been president of the university for many years, um, out of touch with, technically, but he realizes no one's going to hire him. And so he says, I got to become a practicing engineer again. So he reteaches himself mechanical engineering, civil engineering
Oh,
by walking bridges and things like that and starting in private practice. But by the time he died, around 90, he got the highest award of the American Civil Engineering Society.
yeah. Yeah.
But he
So,
had to start all from scratch.
yeah. So I guess you're saying Chinese Americans have contributed a lot in the sciences, but it hasn't been easy, right?
It was not easy in the 50s and 60s. There was a lot of prejudice
Yeah.
during
Yeah.
those days.
By the way,
And there was a huge prejudice, the Chinese Exclusion Act. So it goes back a long time.
yeah. Well, my father was a scholar and my mother was a scholar, and they had the same mentality. He took the exam, for the exam that went on for centuries of
Right.
scholar diplomat, but then he ended up immigrating to the U.S. and became a professor and a dean here. Now, tell me now, what's all of that is a traditional, not a traditional, but a pretty extraordinary science career. How do you end up Commerce, the Secretary of Energy? I mean, it's like, wait a minute, that's kind of a big detour, right? Not detour, but a
Yeah.
segue. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I around year 2000, I was active in physics and animated parameters, things like that. By the middle late 1990s, half of my center of focus was in biology, biophysics, molecular biology. But around the year 2000, I started as kind of an interested citizen. There's rumblings about climate change. So I started going, well, I don't know anything about climate change. So I started reading popular articles, then a few articles, and thought to myself, there may be some truth in this.
Yeah,
That maybe there's, we didn't know for sure. This isn't 1990. It was not as clear as it is 2026, but I said, even if they're half right uh, and half wrong, it could be significant. So I started looking into more, started putting in the tail end of my talks in physics or biology. And in 2004, my former boss at Bell Labs was director of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. It's a
yeah,
national lab right adjacent to University of California, Berkeley. When I was a graduate student and postdoc and professor there, I was a member of Berkeley Lab. It's a very distinguished lab. 15 Nobel laureates worked there. Maybe 30 young scientists got their early training at Berkeley Lab who've gone to get Nobel Prizes.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
an amazing place.
yeah,
And I said, well, this is run by the Department of Energy. Here I'm giving some talks about climate change. if I went there and could get these for world-class scientists to just at least think about it.
Yeah.
And maybe if they may, they may be doing this, but but they have the capacity. And so I said, who am I to talk about climate change if I'm saying I had said no twice.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, I was asked by Berkeley Lab and also the then director at Slack said, I want to recommend you for this. You're perfect for this job. And I said, no, I don't want to. I'm happy doing research. So anyway, so in the end, they said, well, just come and have a tour and interview. And, if there's a 5 or 10% chance you'll take the job, we want to, we want to interview you.
A shot. Yeah.
And, and so I did, and thinking, well, what the heck? And so, the afternoon after the interview, I got this phone call and said, the job is yours if you want it. Now, by then, I was doing this. I'm not doing this to get a job offer so I can better my position at Stanford. I was thinking to myself, you're going to interview. There's the reason you're doing this is because of energy climate change.
Right.
So if you have the opportunity, you're going to take it.
Yeah.
So I said, fine, I took it. And I went there and started giving talks both on campus, but also on the Hill. These and thinking, some of my colleagues in chemistry and physics said, well, we don't know much about climate change. And I said, neither do I. We're going to teach ourselves.
Yeah.
This is like 2004,
Yeah.
2005. And so we started to teach ourselves what science can do in order to lead to the breakthroughs we need to make the transition faster, cheaper, better.
Right.
And so it did start to shift careers and both mid careers, but also younger people who were going to do something else, and they heard me talk about this and say, "Hey, this is exciting." So that was happening. Uh, After my second year as Berkeley lab, there's a lot of excitement in the lab. People were jazzed about what was going on. And then so universities, some really top-rated universities, started trying to get me interested in becoming president of the university.
Hmm.
And I said, well, I've only been here 2 years. I came here to do a job. It wouldn't be right if I just left after, 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
Maybe a couple years from now, but I'm not going to do this. One of the schools was the University of Chicago, where President-elect Obama had very strong ties.
Right.
And they're serious because when you say no the first time, then they get other people to call you up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Chicago did this. And I explained to Chicago and a couple of really great schools, look, it's the soil. I came here to do a job, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I guess
I
that,
didn't do this as a stepping stone to be a university president.
yes, you're right. And so that I think Obama may have heard about that anyway, but I was trying to be honorable and it was being noticed that I could be a good manager and get people. Being a good manager is to get people excited about something.
Yeah. 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 That's right. But also, I think what's wonderful about your career is that you haven't been motivated by, you know, fame or anything. You've always just been focused on, here's a problem I think I can solve. And I wish there were more people like that because the vast majority of people, they may talk about the cause, but a big part of why they want to do it is self-advancement and fame. So but sometimes it works backwards, which is if you're not seeking it, sometimes you do better because you aren't seeking it, right?
Well, when I was joined to Stanford faculty, Stanford had a bunch of Nobel laureates, and one of them took me under and said, "Look, Steve, the rumors you may get a Nobel Prize. The best thing you can do is don't even think about it. Just do your work
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and concentrate on that. That's what's important.
Yeah.
And that was great advice.
Yeah.
Just that you don't, if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't come, it's okay. You're not in for that. And so I try to inculcate that in my trainees. You're not in it for the glory. You're not in it for anything except the love of doing science and training other scientists. And so one of my proudest things is out of the 60 plus people who've come through my laboratory since I left Bell Laboratories, two-thirds of them went in academia. Uh, they are doing very well. I think there are 15 or 16 now have chaired positions. There are 4 in the National Academy of Sciences. There'll be at least another 5 or 6.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, like 30% of my
So
grad.
you've been a good mentor as well, I guess, right?
Well, it was my mentor was a role model for me,
Yeah.
and I think of course I'm going to be selfish, but because what I really would be really cool if some of my group members would get a Nobel Prize,
Yeah. No,
but
that's right.
that's up to luck and whatever.
Now
Uh,
we were talking about the your trip to be Secretary of Energy. You sure it wasn't Secretary of Physics? No, they just misspelled it.
you know,
So Barack Obama noticed you, right? Because
yeah.
you were being recruited to University of Chicago, and he's from Chicago. And what happened from there?
Well, I get a phone call in the third week in November saying the president-elect would like you to fly to Chicago and talk about an important job.
Hmm.
I said, well, I'm not sure I really want to work for the government. What kind of job are you talking about? And they said, Secretary of Energy. So I said, okay, for that, I will fly there.
Hmm.
The previous president, Bush II administration, wanted me to throw my hand in the ring for science advisor. I said, no,
Hmm.
I don't want to be a science advisor. You're an advisor. I'm happy doing my research.
Yeah.
Very different if you're a cabinet member, but you have budget authority.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was huge difference. And so I met with President-elect Obama, just two of us, one-on-one for an hour.
Yeah.
He wanted to know what I thought about this, that, and the other thing. I wanted to know what he thought about. And at the end of that, my wife said, well, what was it like? And I said, this guy's really good. If
Yeah.
he asks, I will say yes.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks later, he asked.
What do you think, if you look back on being the Secretary of Energy, what would you point as the couple things you're most proud of while you were there?
Yeah. I would say number one, I started this thing called RPE, Advanced Research Projects for Energy. It was modeled after DARPA. I
Hmm.
was on a National Academies committee in
Hmm.
2005 that recommended within the Department of Energy we start something, a DARPA-like funding
Right,
for
right.
very bold, innovative research, high risk, high reward. While I was a member of the committee, and the committees then sent me to the House Science Committee hearing, where it was up to me to convince them to authorize it, and that worked. And then they sent me to the Department of Energy to convince the then Secretary of Energy, Sam Bodman,
Hmm.
from Bush II administration, and he liked it, but the people within the Department of Energy, the career people, didn't like it because this was an applied thing, and they were afraid they would freeze out basic research.
Yeah.
And so although it's there in the United States, there's authorization, which means you're allowed to do it, and there's appropriation, which means you have money to do it.
Right.
And during then when Obama got elected, the economy was in free fall, and there was emergency measure is bipartisan, nonpartisan emergency money to get the country out of this free fall
Oh,
and the
yeah.
dot-com bust. And so there was tons of money for 2 years. I mean, the budget of Department of Energy at that time was 50, 60 billion, but there was another 34 billion of discretionary money.
Wow.
Right. And so I landed on 3 or 4 billion of discretionary money and actually had a lot of control over other branches because Department of Energy, transportation, electric vehicles, hybrids, things like that. So it was an amazing thing. And so I took 200 million, 400 million for 2 years to start RPE.
Hmm.
All right. And I knew if we started it, it better be successful within a year and a half because it didn't have base budget funding.
Yeah, right,
So you
right.
have to convince Congress if there's a new branch within the Department of Energy that it's worth funding. So because they'll say, well, why do we need something new? We got all these other programs. And it worked very well. It's because I got very, very good people to come join the Department of Energy. That was unusual. Secretary of Energy doesn't pick up the phone and call people and recruit. The
Yeah,
Secretary of Energy doesn't do this because the Secretary of Energy never was a scientist before.
right.
So I was the first scientist. And as an active scientist, and the fact that I was willing to work for government, I said, look, why don't you come join me? You wouldn't believe I would work for government. We're here to save the world.
Yeah,
I literally said that and got some extraordinarily brilliant people to come work for the Department of Energy, RPE, members of the National Academy who got elected of engineering or science in their 40s, but they're still in their 40s. But they were willing to put their career on hold for a couple of years to do this. There's 3 year and it was an amazing thing because it was a rumor in this group, the first two cadres of people, they had 3 year terms of the RPE folks. They said that, the guys giving out the money are smarter than the guys getting the money. And I said,
uh,
that's the way it should be.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Because they were so good. It was not, you sent out for lots of peer review. You actually were a program manager, and
yeah,
like DARPA, you talk to them every quarter, and it was coming back to me. Where did you get these people? They're helping us solve our technical problems.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know, Instead of just uh, they were really good technically and got their head into it and said, oh, and I said, this is what you want.
yeah,
So it really, and word got out, Congress was super impressed, and so then they base funded it.
yeah, yeah.
So that I was very proud of RPE. The first director of RPE, he was there for a year and a half. I knew from my Berkeley days when I was lab director, I promoted him to be a division director. Yeah, he had not been. He's a young guy. He's in his Arun Majumdar in his early middle 40s. Became a division director. He hadn't been in chair of the department or section, but and then and when I went to the Department of Energy, I recruited him and said, I want you to be my first director of RPE. And he was really brilliant also. And so I think Arun really set the tone and pace. And I would talk to him several times a week. In fact, the first couple of weeks, he lived in our house. He didn't have a place to stay. So I said, oh, you can stay at our house.
Well, we're sadly we're almost reaching the end of the hour. We'd like to end roughly on time, but maybe I'll ask you to first of all, you notice I don't say, well, tell me about what contribution you made to the country, because if the audience can't figure it out based on what you stole, there's something seriously wrong. Uh, but I'll ask you just one ending question, and that is, what do you think the future looks like for the U.S. in terms of science and energy? And I say that partly because there have been a lot of things that make you worry, right, about funding of NIH and funding of science, but also what's happening to some of the universities that have some of the finest, research departments. I worry about that, and certainly that affects climate change, right? That certainly have an impact. What's your view? That can we turn around some of these bumps in the road that are happening?
I hope so. I think if you, I think a lot of American prosperity was based on science and technology. Let's be candid. Whole industries were created on the preeminence of science and technology, in large part driven by immigrants, first
Right.
and second generation people. And so we now with this thing that some people are being questioned, what's the value of science? They don't realize that if you look at, the computer revolution, this revolution, the internet, healthcare, all these things, that they're forgetting this. So I think, and and China's wants to rise
Yes.
and heavily investing in science because they're following the American playbook.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we have to, the scientists, we it's up to us to try to say that, to convince we're useful. We end up creating economic prosperity, as well as for the other things that what we do it for, like understanding nature. But it is useful and it's a driver of the economy. I think I'm worried about being less open to immigrants. It was the immigrants from Europe and from China uh, really made science, added so much to science, and so
Yeah.
I'm afraid of that. I'm hoping that we will. This is only a temporary thing, but you can't take it for granted, and so. It's, the National Science Foundation, it's Department of Energy, it's the National Science Foundation, it's NASA, it's
Yeah.
all these budgets that are contributing. And it's, it is worrisome because we may, you know, give this up, and because I don't know, we forgot how good this was
Yeah. No, that's right.
for the country and for the world, quite frankly.
And I worry about it too. And I think some of the things that on funding but also a lot of actions that have been taken are very damaging. Sadly, I am hopeful that maybe there'll be a wake-up call and people realize that they have to reverse certain policies. On the other hand, there's so many people I know who are in biotech and so forth saying, or research that say, when you stop it, and you can't just turn it on and suddenly turn it on because you create a lot of permanent damage. So I'm hoping that some wisdom creeps into the government and society, and we try to return to what has really been was a successful
Right.
formula, right, for this country, as you said. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity to spend an hour to reminisce with you and talk about how you did what you did. For those of us who, at best, were successful in one career, we're envious that you've been successful in at least two. But you've earned it, and you've definitely contributed a great deal to both science, but also to the society, and we want to thank you for that. So thank you very much, and it's a very pleasure to interview
Oh,
today.
thank you. You're too kind. But anyway, it's so I hope your listeners have gotten something out of it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.